Welcome back, everyone. Today I have a super fun project. We're gonna be making a cycling running pack. And this is a perfect bag to wear when you're going out getting some exercise, maybe cycling or running. It has a spot to put your keys, your phone, wallet, maybe some cards, and even a water bottle. So this bag packs a lot of functionality. But apart from the functionality, it's also super comfortable. We added padded shoulders and multiple adjustments to really get that perfect fit. And don't feel bad if you're new to sewing, you can still make this project. I break it down super simple, step by step, so anyone stepping into this video can make this bag. And with all that being said, if you're new to the channel, download that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started supplies, you're gonna wanna grab yourself 1 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas or a lighter weight twill. Both of these fabrics are woven and they're breathable, and that's primarily what you're looking for. So I'm actually gonna be using a lighter weight canvas. The end result turned out really good, so pretty much just look for a lightweight, breathable, non-stretch fabric. You'll need a 1/2 yard for your secondary fabric. You're definitely gonna wanna use a lighter weight material. A standard lining or windbreaker material will work great. I'm just gonna be using a regular lining. It turned out really good, and it's also very cheap. You'll need a 1/4 yard for your shoulder pad fabric. I think neoprene works the best, but any padded fabric will work fine because it's gonna be rested on your shoulders. And when you're running or cycling, you don't want a lot of scratchy fabric right there. So any padded material that can get wet will work perfectly. You'll need 2 zippers, one 12-inch and one 7-inch. I'm gonna be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. This is just a big roll of zipper you can buy, and you trim your zippers as you need them. And you just really get precise zippers with minimal waste. You'll need 2 yards of 1-inch webbing. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 2 strap adjusters, 2 sliders, and 2 buckles. And this is considered the hardware. So all this hardware, you want to be 1 inch as well. You want this hardware to match the width of your webbing. And if you choose to change up the width of the webbing, which is totally doable, you'll just also have to remember to change up the width of your hardware too. You'll need 10 inches of elastic band. This is gonna be for the mesh pocket on the inside of the bag. If you choose not to add this, you don't need the elastic. You'll also need a 1/4 yard of elastic cord. This is also optional. It's for the back water bottle holder so you can cinch it shut. If you choose to get the elastic cord and add the water bottle holder, you'll also need 1 cord stopper. And as far as the cord stoppers go, you can either choose 1 hole or 2 hole. You'll need about 12 inches of reflective tape. We only did 1 strip on the back. This reflective tape I used is really good, and I highly recommend using it if you plan on running or cycling at night. But you can totally add more, so if you choose to add the reflective tape, maybe just buy a roll of it and see how it goes. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And before you get started, you're gonna wanna cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is gonna allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern taped together, it's time to move into cutting.
And after taping it together, it should look like this. And for the best results, I recommend adjusting your printer alignment. From here, we're gonna cut on the outside of the black line. And after cutting, you should end up with 4 side bottle panels, 2 cut out of your main panel and 2 cut out of your lining, 2 center bottle panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your lining, 2 bottom bottle panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your lining, 2 elastic sleeve bottle panels cut out of your main fabric, 1 front pocket main bottom panel cut out of your main fabric, 1 front pocket main top panel cut out of your main fabric, 4 front pocket zipper end panels, 2 cut out of your main fabric and 2 cut out of your lining, 1 front pocket divider panel cut out of your lining, 1 front pocket bottom side panel cut out of your main fabric, 1 front pocket top side panel cut out of your main fabric, 2 shoulder panels cut out of neoprene or a padded fabric, 1 inside mesh pocket panel cut out of a mesh material or your secondary fabric. And I'm using a grippy mesh. This is really gonna hold the stuff on the inside of the bag down while you're running or cycling. And lastly, 2 main front panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your lining. Moving on to construction, we're gonna start with the front pocket zipper end panels. in the 6.5-inch zipper. Be sure to cut it as close to 6.5 as you can. Also mark the zipper edge on your panel. Place the right side of the secondary layer on the back end of the zipper, matching it up with the zipper ends, and we're going to place the right side of the fabric on top. Line up all the patterns, and no worries if it goes over the edge of the zipper. I made this pattern to work with multiple width zippers so we can trim that after we're done sewing. With everything pinned down and lined up, we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After sewing, we're going to flip the wrong side of the panel together and add a top stitch to both of the new side zipper seams. After adding the top stitch, we can snip the panels to match the width of the zipper. Next, we're going to grab the front pocket main top and bottom panels, and we're going to be sewing the zipper in between these two panels. So first you want to decide which way you want the zipper to open. After deciding, we're going to start with the bottom panel and place it on the bottom side of our zipper. You want to make sure it's centered in the panel, and again I gave a little bit of forgiveness in the zipper end panels. You can trim them to match the main pocket panel after stitching. I know it's hard to find that perfect size zipper, so that's why I decided to make it a little bit more universal. But anyways, place the right sides together, centering the zipper in that bottom main panel, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Open up the panel, and we're going to grab the main top panel and do the exact same thing on the opposite side of the zipper. Place the right sides together, lining the zipper up in the center of the panel, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Open up the panels with the right sides facing up, and before we add our top stitch, we're actually going to go a little bit further and serge both of these raw edges. Typically I add double fold bias tape, but since this is a lighter weight bag, we're just going to serge, or you can add a zigzag stitch. Overall, this is going to keep it lighter weight and help reduce any fraying in the future. After serging, or if you choose to skip that step, the next step, we're going to add a top stitch to both of those side seams. And this is going to be our new front panel for our front pocket assembly. Moving on, grab the front pocket divider panel, and we're going to place it on the wrong side of our complete front panel. To make it easier in future steps, we're going to stitch around the outside edge. I'm using a serger, but feel free to use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. The main goal is to combine both of these layers into one. And also by using a serger, it's going to help reduce a little of that fraying, making for a longer lasting bag. Next, we're going to grab the front pocket top side panel and cut our zipper to match the length of our panel. I actually like to cut mine just a little bit past, and then we'll snip the ends later on. Using the pattern, we're going to place the zipper on the zipper edge of our panel. And remember to place the right sides together, centering that zipper in between the panel, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And before we add our top stitch, we're actually going to serge that inside edge, just like the previous step. And from there, we're going to add our top stitch. And like in the previous steps, feel free to skip the serging. From here, we're going to use the pattern and hem the opposite edge of the panel. Before we do this, we're going to add one more serge to really clean up that edge. So back to the hemming, we're going to roll it over a 1/4 inch, and I recommend rolling it over, pinning it down, and pressing it if you can. We'll be stitching this edge to the main panel, so it's really important to keep nice and even. Place the panel off to the side and grab the front pocket bottom side panel. And we're pretty much going to be repeating the same steps, but we're going to start by serging the edge. After serging, we're going to hem the bottom edge, and that's the edge you serged, or if you didn't serge, that's totally fine. Press and pin it down so it's perfectly even. From here, we're going to grab both the top and the bottom. Make sure the bottom is even with the top. We will be sewing these together, so you want the width to match. So place the right sides together, and the bottom is shorter, so you're going to want to pin one side down, and then pull it over and pin the opposite side down, making sure the zipper train is towards the inside of the panel. Once you have the panels lined up evenly and pinned down, we're going to stitch both edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And just be cautious sewing over the zipper. After you stitch both edges, we're going to snip the zipper flush with the seam allowance. The next step is optional. We're going to be adding a zigzag stitch to clean up the raw edges. Again, this is a little bit different than normally. Normally, I would add double fold bias tape, but since it's a lighter weight bag, we're just going to add a zigzag stitch, so it's very similar to a serge. It's going to lock the fibers together and prevent fraying. Moving on, we're going to add a top stitch to both of those side zipper seams. Again, be cautious sewing over the zipper. After top stitching, we're going to face it down with the hem side pointing up, making sure the hem is completely even, and we're going to add a top stitch all the way around that outside edge. I'm using an edge presser foot to help me get a consistent stitch. Little tools like that really help make for a professional look. Next, grab the complete front panel and mark the centers on top and bottom. Do the same for your completed side panel, mark the centers on the top and the bottom, and we're going to line the centers up on both of the panels with right sides together. I highly recommend using pins to make sure it's even all the way around. And if you've done everything with the correct measurement up until this point, it should line up perfectly. And from there, stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And definitely take your time, this can be a little tricky sewing around the corners. After stitching, just double check, flip the right sides out, make sure all the layers got sewn together. No worries if you miss a spot, you can always go back and stitch a little bit to cover up any missed areas. Next, we will be covering up that raw edge on the inside of the bag with bias tape, and I'll be walking you through a few different techniques. The first method is using a bias tape making kit, and this is where you make your own bias tape. It's super simple to do. You cut your bias tape strips, feed it through your folder, and press it as it's coming out your folder. And by picking this method, you get to choose the size and also the color of fabric to match your project. The second method is using a double fold bias tape binder. You install this to your machine and it gives you the ability to sew directly onto your garment. It's a very fast and effective technique. The third technique is using pre-made bias tape. This technique, you're very limited to colors, but it's easy to do. You just fold it over your edge and stitch it down. This is a great way to go if you don't have a lot of tools to work with. And I'm going to be stitching mine on using the double fold bias tape attachment. By far, this is one of the best techniques if you're planning on making a lot of bags, but feel free to use whatever method that works best for you. Or also feel free to skip this step. And after adding the bias tape, I always like to double check to make sure that it's looking right. Pop that right sides out. And another big thing, the bias tape really helps poke out those corners for a nice look. Place the pocket off to the side and grab your shoulder panels. With these, we just add bias tape around the outside edge. And I'm using a padded fabric. I recommend neoprene. The fabric I'm using is a little thin, so I'm actually going to double up the layers for extra padding. Feel free to do the same thing if you're running into the same problem. And from here, we're going to add bias tape all the way around the outside edge. And if you don't want to add the bias tape, you can totally sew the right sides together and pull the right sides out. Either technique will work just fine. Moving on, grab the inside mesh pocket panel. Using the pattern, we're going to fold at the 1/2 inch fold guides. Since this is mesh, it's kind of hard to pin down, but a few pins do work. With the sides folded over, we're going to grab our elastic and cut it just a little bit shorter than the length of the top edge. We want to be able to stretch it to the exact length of the edge, so that way it can be pulled back and cinch up that pocket. Feel free to cut it shorter or longer, and from here we're going to roll it over that edge and stitch directly on the elastic. You're going to have to pull the elastic as you're sewing it, so you can either use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. We only cut ours a little bit shorter, so it's only going to pull back just a little bit. After adding the elastic, we're going to grab the main front panel. We'll only need the main fabric so you can place the lining off to the side. Again, we'll be referencing the pattern to find the perfect location for the pocket placement. With the pocket into position, we're going to roll the bottom edge over the same way we did the side edges, and once you have the pocket placed and pinned down, we're going to stitch both of the side and the bottom edges, leaving the top open. If done correctly, the pocket should sit directly in the center of that main front panel. Next, we'll be adding the complete front pocket assembly. You'll also want to keep this perfectly in the center of that main front panel. A good way to do this is using that inside pocket panel, go around the entire outside edge. And again, I highly recommend pinning this one down because this can move as you're sewing, so having it pinned down will really ensure your pocket stays centered. And like always, once it's pinned down, we're going to stitch all the way around that outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or on the opposite side of that top stitch. Personally, I like to follow directly next to that top stitch. It helps me keep it even all the way around. And definitely take your time. This pocket is going to be on the front center of your bag, so you really want it to look nice and neat. And at this point, we can grab the lining layer and place it directly on top with the wrong sides together. This is a tricky part. We're going to be adding bias tape all the way around the outside edge. Feel free to do whatever method that works best for you. It can be tricky going around the corners, but the best thing to do is practice it and you'll eventually get good at it. And once you get good at it, it really opens up the door to make a lot of interesting, unique bags. But anyways, place the complete front off to the side and grab your center bottle panel. We'll be starting with just the main fabric and using our reflective tape. This is optional and it's a sew-on tape, and we're placing it directly in the center of that panel. Stitch it down on both sides of the tape. This tape is super reflective and I highly recommend adding it if you're going to be using this bag at night. We're just going to be adding one strip to the center panel, but feel free to add more to the other panels. Next, grab the side bottle panel, and we'll be placing the right sides together, lining up the side edges for both the main fabric and the lining. Once you're lined up, stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Open up both of the panels, grab the second side panel, place it on the opposite side of the center panel, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you are adding more reflective tape, I recommend adding it to both of the side panels. Open up both of the panels, place the lining off to the side, fold the seam allowance towards the side panels, and add a top stitch. After adding your top stitch, place it off to the side and grab our bottom bottle panel. We're going to be lining this panel up on the bottom edge, so I like to line up the center and then kind of turn it and curve it towards the outside edge. And we're going to be doing the same thing for the lining panel. And there should be a little left on both outside edges, and that's going to be for your fold allowance. And I think the easiest way to do this is to start at the outside edge, sew towards the center, and kind of curve it as you're sewing once you hit both of those points. And it's always best to double check after you're done stitching to make sure that both of the panels line up evenly. Next, we're going to grab our elastic sleeve bottle panel, and we're going to start by hemming just one of the side edges on both of the panels. So fold it over a 1/4 inch and add a stitch. If you went more than a 1/4 inch, that's totally fine because this is going to be the opening for our elastic. Using the guide on the pattern, we're going to fold the panel in half and add it to the top edge of our lining. Point both of the hemmed sides towards the center panel. No worries if they hang off the edge a little bit because we're going to trim them. And we're going to grab the main fabric, place it over top with the right sides together. Line the top edge up and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the wrong sides together, making sure that top edge is lined up perfectly. Place a couple pins if necessary and add a top stitch. And this stitch is really going to keep that lining in place and that top edge even as you're using it. From here, we're going to be adding the elastic, so grab the elastic of your choice. Feel free to use a braided band or any type of elastic will work. And once you picked out your elastic, we're going to cut it longer than the top edge. And this is so we can fully open that pocket and cinch it closed. When it comes to the cord stoppers, you have a few different options. You can use a double opening or a single opening. I'll be using a single opening and feeding it through in the center of the elastic. With the cord stopper on, we're going to feed the elastic ends through the elastic sleeve. Pull both ends all the way through so it sticks out the opposite side and add a tack stitch. And this stitch is just to hold the elastic down, so just go over the elastic. Snip the elastic ends flush with the sides. And finally, the last step for our back pocket, we're going to serge all the way around the outside edge, locking the layers together and overall making for a cleaner inside pocket. And after serging, or if you decide to stitch the layers, just double check to make sure everything is looking good. And from here, we're going to use the pattern, fold the side panel edges at a 1/2 inch. Just like the previous steps, you can add pins or press at the folds. With both of the edges folded, we're going to grab our main back panel. We'll be starting with just the main fabric. Place the complete back pocket in the center of that main back panel, making sure the top does not go over the top edge of the back panel. And both of the bottom edges for the pocket and the back panel are perfectly lined up. That means the wrong side of the bottom panel will be touching the right side of the main back panel. Pin everything into place and stitch both of the sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance in the bottom edge as close as you can to the outside edge. And the corners are folded towards the bottom, so the bottom panel is tucked up under the center panel. And like always, after stitching, just do a double check to make sure that everything's functional and working correctly. And as far as this pocket goes, I tried to make it as flat as possible so that way it's not a big bag on your back when you're running or cycling, but it's big enough to hold a drink or anything else you may want to carry. So next we're going to grab the main back panel lining, place the wrong sides together, and add bias tape all the way around that outside edge. This is why we didn't bring the pocket all the way to the top, so it gives us enough room to just pass by with the bias tape. And after adding the bias tape, it's going to complete the back assembly. And the last thing we have to do is to connect all the panels with webbing. So you're going to want to start by cutting two 3.5 inch strips, grabbing one strap adjuster and slider. Feed one of the webbing strips through the slider, and you're going to want to point both of the ends back towards each other, making for a nice clean edge on both sides. With the webbing through the slider, we're going to place it on the back side of our shoulder panel. With it in the center of the panel, we're going to do the same thing with the strap adjuster. Feed it through the back end of the strap adjuster, fold it over twice, and add it to the front portion of our shoulder panel. From here, we're going to stitch them down with a box stitch, just regular bar tacks, or you can do a box and an X. Feel free to use whatever method that you think is the strongest. And we're going to repeat this process for the opposite shoulder panel. And the webbing can go in as far as you want on the panel, just make sure you do it the exact same on the opposite shoulder panel. Next, we're going to cut 2 more 3.5-inch strips of webbing and add them to the opposite side of our slider. Fold it over the exact same way and repeat it for the opposite shoulder panel. Grab the complete back panel. Using the pattern, we're going to mark out the webbing placement guides. The biggest thing to note is that the top ones are more straight up and down and the bottom ones are on a diagonal. With the webbing pinned down and perfectly lined up with one another, we're going to do the exact same thing, add a box stitch, a bar stitch, or a box and an X stitch, whatever one you want. Double check to make sure you stitched them on evenly with one another, and from here we're going to move to the bottom and add our webbing strips to the bottom. We'll be adding 14.5-inch strips of webbing, and all we're doing is rolling the edge over once, adding it in our placement zone, and stitching it down. And just like the top straps, you want these bottom straps to perfectly mirror each other with the same 45-degree angle. After you get done stitching, lay it out flat with the right side up to double check. If everything's looking good, we're going to cut 2 more 3.5-inch strips. Grab your 1-inch buckle. Feed the webbing strip through the side with one opening. Fold the webbing ends over the same as the previous steps, and we're going to place it on the bottom edge of our front main panel. And just like the previous step, make sure they mirror each other and stitch them down. And with them stitched down, we're going to cut 2 7.5-inch strips of webbing and place these on the top edge, folding the end over once. Always feel free to reference the pattern for the webbing placement. With both sides perfectly mirrored and pinned down, the last thing to do is to feed our webbing end strips through. So match up the bottom of the back with the bottom of the front, and the top of the back with the top of the front. When all of the ends are fed through the buckles and the adjusters, we're going to roll the end over twice so that way it doesn't slide back through our buckle or our adjuster. This will also clean up the raw edge of our exposed webbing ends. Lastly, adjust it to your size, add your branding. I like to put my branding in areas I can clip things to, and from there your bag is all complete.
Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I really hope you like this bag. This was a super fun one to make. I like the way it fits. I have a lot of different iterations I'm already thinking about for this bag and just regular hiking and different gear that you can tack onto it. So if you do like this one, definitely comment down below. Maybe I'll make a few more iterations of this style where it's the chest bag. Or if you have any features you want to see added to it, definitely comment that down below because I'd love to see it. And if you ever make anything, tag me on Instagram because I think it's awesome seeing everyone create stuff with the patterns. But other than that, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.